right, this is great. Welcome to another Saphyre live webinar series episode. I am today's host, Gabino Roche, CEO and founder. And today's topic that we're going to cover is how buy-side firms streamline their operations. And to talk about this, today's guest is our very own Max Lamb, head of EMEA operations and part of our buy-side strategy lead. Max, maybe you can give a quick introduction for yourself.
Thank you, Gabino. It's good to be here today. So we're thinking about, or I was thinking at least about some of the big challenges that we face or are trying to face in the industry, particularly in the onboarding area. One of the biggest of these is actually getting management to understand why they should pay attention, because fundamentally it is a really manual area. There's a lot of emails, there's a lot of typing, there's a lot of manual keying, there's quite a lot of checklists. And all that manual work, in my experience, it causes operational risk events, which, in English, really writing checks for errors. And it's that's one area, but also, a slow onboarding, slow client. And I think something that, CFOs don't appreciate as much as they maybe should is that if you have revenue in the pipeline and you could get it off the pipeline sooner to the top line, then that's more profit to make. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why this side of the industry needs some modernization. Other things that I've seen a lot of in my time, would be an investment manager who maybe doesn't know which trading lines they have open with a broker, or maybe they don't have full visibility over which custody markets they have open. And that, again, it leads to errors, but it leads to slowness, it leads to frustration on the dealing desk. And then we see some really, for a modern industry, we see generally across the board, huge variety of things being done manually, which you wouldn't expect to be done. People sitting there checking LEIs so that they don't have reach. Sorry, Gabino, you're going to say something.
Yeah, no, just real quick, because I think the part, and we jumped right into the topic, but I just, before we lose track for the audience, because we usually start this, is we remind everyone that there's going to be a Q&A session. This is a live webinar. And just want you guys to be aware, if you're in Zoom, there's definitely a chat function, a Q&A function, I should say, that you should be able to submit your questions. So again, if you want to, our administrators will actually make those questions available. We will be answering it at the end of the webinar. Also, there's an email option as well. You can email us at events@saphyre.com. Again, that's events@saphyre.com. So either if you're in Zoom, there's a Q&A function, or if you want, you can email at events@saphyre.com, and we will have that at the end of the webinar. And then furthermore, Max, as you jumped in, and I could see you got some sunlight coming through, you might want to scoot to the left a second, but I can see the rays coming through. But what I will tell you is, part of the reason why we're bringing you on to this webinar, and I want folks to know, this has been humbling for me. We've built this solution. We've been addressing issues like this because we have folks from the industry, folks in the operations. You have a history working with investment consultants, working at major investment managers. Clearly, your background, especially in the buy-side space, is one of the reasons why we've been able to actually explore these issues that you actually raised, and especially when it comes to how the middle and back office is actually the whole plumbing that supports the front office to know where they can trade with reliability to settle faster. And you kind of hit on some of the tops of the trees. And I'd love for you to kind of share some of that color, given your background, because that's actually how I personally have learned from you. You specifically hit on the onboarding steps. So it might be good to kind of actually share with our audience first that the problem areas of where this happens today, right? We get a little bit, we conflate KYC activities with the onboarding activities, with some of the tax activities. So let's just maybe step through how you set up these accounts and where it needs to be checked on. Maybe we could touch on that for a few seconds, and then I want to get into some of the other steps of hey, where the legal and operational setups come into play. But I'll pause for you to react.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Gabino. And I think one of the things that maybe isn't appreciated, which we'll get to in this, is that the data that you set up in onboarding is the data that's then relied on throughout the life cycle of the client, whether it's producing performance reports or for settling trades. And when it's not done well or not done digitally, it causes all sorts of problems. So, in terms of the stages and the things that go on, I was talking about things happening manually before. The investment onboarding team, they will be sending emails out to clients saying, well, can we have some KYC, please, some documents? And then they have to email those same documents back out to brokers, counterparties, banks. It's a manual process. It's a slow process, and is likely to cause errors and things like that.
Let's stop through that. Like I know for a fact from my past experience, especially on the sell side, we had buy sides that are responding to KYC requests for the same documentation. Okay. Then you have situations where, let's say the tax team is replying with expired tax forms with counterparties. Okay. As well as, the tax agents and the custodians and the markets that are being opened for those different areas. The tax forms are the same things that are used as part of the KYC. The tax forms are not just used for KYC, but also for onboarding and for the maintenance refresh. So just across like 3 areas, we're talking about redundant activities that are occurring. And then we know, I know you had discussed with me offline prior to the call, that in the post-trade arena, sometimes it's discovered that there are these new accounts. And for these new accounts, that KYC activity is actually occurring during the post-trade processing step. And so again, now we're talking about 4 areas where the same activity is occurring. And there's an opportunity here to kind of streamline that. We're going to touch on that in a second. Why don't we hit on real quick on when we say operational setups, because there are firms that are using multiple electronic trading platforms. And then there's also dependencies on some of the derivatives trading, the legal documentation that's behind it. So maybe you can touch on that a little bit. And just for the video angle, Max, the sunlight's like blazing through some light, so it looks like you're getting a ray. But yeah, that might be better from a visual standpoint. But yeah, maybe you can opine on that.
Yeah, so literally thousands of emails coordinating multiple teams and external parties, where the onboarding team is just trying to get the client set up, but they often end up sending the same information to multiple counterparties. They will manually be stepping through setting up order management systems. They'll manually be setting up other systems internally. And they might have a checklist. Sometimes they might have a workflow engine to do this. But what it doesn't really do, whilst it digitizes the process, sometimes it doesn't really have memory embedded in it. It's really very much a level 1 digitization a lot of the time. I know that's something you're interested in.
Let's also highlight that, right? So when you do a legal amendment on a fund, and if you are tracking, let's say, net asset value valuations dropping 20%, right now, you did the amendment, you added that new fund to that umbrella agreement, but then it's trapped in the documentation. Today, firms are tracking it on a spreadsheet for the most part, right, as to whether you're compliant. And then you got to do that work as part of either the trading or post-trade activities to see if you're compliant. So that's where there's a gap. It's like, why aren't we remembering that if we've already captured it up front and then maintaining it so that the compliance teams and the post-trade processing teams see the same information? So now we're talking about 3 areas that are dependent as part of the legal activities that are going on. And this same information, and correct me if I'm wrong, Max, given, again, your background, it's stuff that's actually needed for the trading platforms to be aware of.
Exactly. And we have people sending net asset values for funds and portfolios, manually calculated and sending them out maybe once a month to the broker. So you find out incredibly late in the day if you have a problem with the trading line. It's something that really should be automated in most cases.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Let's cap this for the audience before we go into how you streamline it. Let's kind of categorize this for the audience, right? So I think we have a visual for this. So if we talk about the fact that it's onboarding activities, right? Setting up new trading accounts, opening up different markets and currencies. If we talk about the KYC analysis that's actually being performed, responding to those requests required to send a lot of the same documents that are related to the onboarding. And again, that coincides nicely with the tax. So you're completing information for the tax review. Same tax documentation is used to open up the different markets, India versus Brazil. It's also the same documentation used for the KYC requests and the onboarding. Then we talk about the fact that legal is occurring where you're amending legal agreements with multiple parties in bulk, because you usually don't just trade with one party. And there's compliance details stuck within that needs to be applied, not just for the onboarding, but for the trading and post-trade, which then segues nicely to the operational setups across multiple electronic platforms. What we didn't hit on is the fact that there's credit risk reviews that are occurring the entire time. And it's actually the foundation of this information is predicated on everything else we just shared before that. So this is a huge thing that the sell sides can benefit, on top of giving visibility to the buy side as to where they stand in terms of credit with those counterparties.
Yeah.
So
it's all about the data points that the onboarding team touches, which literally are used in so many places further down the cycle in the investment manager, but also, as you say, at the brokers. And if you're doing those data points manually, it's not only is it inefficient and it's slow and all those stuff, but you don't then have that data that you need to do things straight through process, to do it automatically. And with T+1 around the corner in UK is more and more of a problem, which I think we saw with some firms in America as well, where they were just trying to do the same things quicker instead of doing the same things better.
Yeah, and let's give a visual too on how that workflow works, right? So because folks say, okay, you went over the activities, but what's really happening across multiple parties? And we took a stab at like a typical buy-side firm that has to interact with multiple sell-side counterparties, interact with the underlying clients for separately managed accounts, the fact that we have custodial data that's coming in, and then electronic platforms. And the fact that we're having these dotted lines, it's either email, faxes, and phone calls, or manual rekeying of information that's going on across all these parties. This creates a ton of not only redundancies, but chances for errors to occur. And there's no data synchronization. It's actually having to go through a manual checklist. You got to make sure that you've got this actually going through end to end. And that's actually part of what we've discussed in prior webinars, where there are redundant processes to kind of double check, triple check, quadruple check that this stuff was done. And it's great for the first time onboarding. Where it all gaps is when there's maintenance events that interrupt this, that you've opened up an account and it's 2 years in and an event occurs that requires a change. It's very difficult to monitor that change and catch it. Sometimes it's just sent in an email or a fax and people are supposed to act on it. And they got to remember this visual to update all these parties with that change. So let's step away for a second, and now let's segue more into the solutioning space. And I wanted to put it in your court, Max, because many ages ago, I used to come to your offices and to talk about how do we solution and create, let's say, intelligent memory around this. We hit on this a little bit in terms of the problem areas. I think part of the problem, and this came up in our offline discussion prior to the webinar, you had mentioned that a lot of these firms are very siloed in their approaches, right? Not just in terms of the buy side, but their sell side counterparties. So the activities and the data points get repeated. Could you talk a little bit about the commonalities one more time, right? Where we see there's overlap, because then that's where firms, regardless of what technology solution you use, see this as an opportunity to kind of streamline their operations.
Yeah, of course. So it's no matter how good you make your internal workflow. So some of the problems we've talked about, you could put an internal workflow engine in and solve them. But the problem is that even if you get all those data points working beautifully, it doesn't actually connect you with the street. So it doesn't connect the investment manager to the broker, to the custodian. And it's that swapping of data, because investment managers don't live in a silo. They're trading with 100, 200, 300 counterparties. They've got 50, 60, 80 custodians they're dealing with. And the solution here is partly about making things efficient by proper digitization, by memory, and doing things within your own house, but it's about finding that way to interoperate with other parties and exchange those data points. Whether it's about which markets have I got open in custody, whether it's about what are the SSIs that I can settle trades properly, which trading lines have I got available with the broker. Is amazing how you can get a client using this synchronization tool we have, and suddenly they realize that they thought they had trading lines open with the broker, and the broker didn't think that, and the other way around too, right? So it's all about getting that clean set of data that you can then use.
So I think what you're really saying here is, how do we remember this data, not just for the buy side firm, but also for the counterparties, electronic platforms, the asset services that sit outside of their firm, so they're all seeing the same thing at the same time. And then I think, look, again, visuals help people remember things. I think there's a way that we have a diagram that kind of lays this out. How do we apply intelligent automation and remember, or actually have memory as of the data, as well as who's permission to see that data? It's not enough to just create a data lake and dump all this somewhere, because then everyone can see everything. What you got to do is remember the data, know when to recall the data. So, okay, for example, we amended a legal agreement, we captured a compliance term, like a NAV termination. When do we expose that to the front office and the post-trade support teams? Okay, that's a great example of intelligent automation that knows when to bring it up. But I would say the second thing is, who's allowed to see it? So if you onboard an account with certain counterparties, you actually know there's a trading relationship established, or even a lending relationship in the securities lending world, that actually maps this. Let's also take this to one more, pivotal example of how this really goes end to end. When firms are opening up custodian accounts in different markets and currencies, they're collecting the account number for let's say the global custodian, right, that they're opening up the account with. They're capturing every local market, local custodian or sub-custodian account number. So what's there for the UK, US versus Brazil and India, for example, okay? And now you already have the structure for the SSI details, okay? Because you have the first level clearing, second level clearing, that gets all rolled in. Now you've captured this at the point of inception, when you open up the accounts. So if you leverage now that same intelligent automation to map this to every trading party you connect with, right? From a trading relationship standpoint, aside of the custodian, now you could send it to broker A, B, and C, that same SSI information. If you've now used that same intelligent automation to map to electronic platforms, then that same SSI data goes to electronic trading platforms A, B, and C, and your order management system on top of it. If there was a maintenance event that occurred and your global custodian changed sub-custodians, and now they send out a fax or an email or a PDF to let you know about those changes, it now comes into that intelligent automation and knows exactly whose permission, because it remembers the trading relationships and the setups as to where that needs to be updated, as well as its effective date, because there's an expiration of the old and an effective date of the new. And then most importantly, trades are happening all throughout this process, right? So when the maintenance event occurs, trading doesn't stop. So how do you know what to display for a trade to settle successfully? If you're tracking the effective and expiration date of these changes, now you can expose this in post-trade. This is really the ecosystem that we're talking about, of how it's not just SSIs, it's about compliance, it's about KYC, it's about transition of account data. There's a plethora of situations that come up front that the front office, quite frankly, doesn't want to have to deal with. They're trying to trust that their middle and back office is taking care of it, but the truth is, their middle and back office is dependent on reconciling that information in real time with every external party, again, your sell-side counterparties, with every electronic platform, as well as the details from their asset servicers. And that's actually what we're trying to, I think, depict via this diagram. I don't know if there was more color on your side, Max, that you wanted to add.
No, I think you say it very well, Gabino. It's clearly, this is not just an onboarding thing, it's not just a data thing, it's everyone. So the dealing desk, for example, they will want to go live with, 8, 9, 12 brokers available. But if things have been done manually, sometimes they need to go live with 3 or 4 brokers available. It's not something that makes them happy, but it's also not something that necessarily is quite as good best execution for the clients. So this is about digitizing the whole process, and everyone benefits. The client benefits, the dealers benefit, settlements teams benefit, onboarding teams benefit. Everyone can work in just a much more efficient way.
And it doesn't matter, again, you don't have to use a technology solution to do it. You can have high-performing teams that are like kind of special forces that are connecting the dots between all these different players and that are proactive calling or emailing or manually keying this information in every system. That is actually possible. That is the hope of a lot of the firms that I've met in the past that they've been trying to do. But I know this pressure is going to get crunched, especially as the global move to T+1 occurs. I know everyone highlights, okay, India and China moved to T+1, the US moved to T+1, and the US market is one of the largest of the world, right? If not the largest, but it's a monolithic market. right? And so therefore, and there's only 2 central settlement depositories in the US. So it's actually easier to kind of coalesce on where that gets done. But the kicker is when Europe turns to T+1, because there's a plethora of CSDs out there and players that need to now work not just in a 24-hour period. In reality, their operations need to work in a T0 fashion, a real-time fashion, in order to meet the T+1 deadline. And so you can have high-performing teams, but if you don't create intelligent automation, not just automation for automation's sake, that's why I use the phrase intelligent automation, remembering when the information needs to be brought up in the right circumstances and who is permissioned to see it. That's where you get this full STP. That's where you have high functioning teams who can focus on higher level issues or functions than some of this rudimentary checklist stuff that is actually being redundantly done in pre-trade and post-trade. So I got one more question. Yeah, go ahead, Max.
Sorry, just from a pure practical point of view, right? It's very difficult to get the people to do these jobs and to do these jobs well. So what you have the opportunity here to do with digitization is to not only upskill the job, but increase the capacity of the team to deal with business. So from a management point of view, if you're busy, you can follow the sun around the world, or alternatively, you can centralize things to one location, but you have flexibility as a result, because you're bringing a whole bunch of things together, creating a whole load of efficiencies while you're at it.
Correct. And I think one of the things behind that is promoting the interoperability of any solution that you work with, so that you're not beholden to one solution. Those solutions are competing for your business by keeping it interoperable, not trapping you into that ecosystem. And so that's why, regardless of whether you look at Saphyre or anything else, that should be your principle, because then you know you have optionality, which is to your point, whether you want to use just purely high performing teams as a labor manual process, or a set of solutions, or even Saphyre for that matter. Again, one of the typical questions, and I know we're showing this on screen right now, that we always get is what about automating compliance and post-trade activities? We kind of hit on that already, but maybe, Max, can you just surmise this real quick for us, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A session.
So this is the things we were talking about before, Gabino, or at least it's multiple things, but things like understanding in your trading agreements, are you going to hit the NAV triggers? And actually proactively dealing with that. So instead of waiting till you've hit the trigger and maybe find your dealing line's gone away, it's knowing in advance when you've used up some of your credit line. It's that sort of activity exactly. You must have other things in mind too.
Well, there's also your LEI registration status. They expire. Yeah. That interrupts post-trade. I see this all the time. There's the fact that, for example, your preferred place of settlement, you want to settle in Euroclear, but you don't have an SSI there, to be honest, and you didn't know that when you should be settling in Clearstream. So, and in such situations, by the way, the rule of thumb right now recommended is that assume the client's correct. Assume the buy-side client's correct for the preferred place of settlement. Well, what if you can actually remember, even though that's your preferred place of settlement, it's not an option for you on this fund or account because you don't have an SSI there. This is, again, how you can create recall, intelligent automation, intelligent recall for where that's actually required. I knew we've used other examples where you want to understand the options of where you can actually settle, or if you're hitting compliance issues, a number of other things, like what is the eligible collateral that you can use. You can actually apply this to the pecking order of what collateral should be used as part of your derivatives contracts. So there's a huge advantage. The technology actually exists. This is not talking points. And for folks who may be skeptical, and you rightly should be skeptical, there's a car that you can actually drive to actually see that entire experience. It does exist today, and there are other plethora of other solutions that you can actually amalgamate together to kind of achieve the same end results. But again, I'm conscious of time, so I want to move to our Q&A session because I already got a little ping that we got some questions that came through. Before we go to the Q&A, we always want to make sure that we get people setting their calendars. Now, the next topic is about how FXall is helping firms trade first and fast with Saphyre. So there's a whole specific topic on this. I know folks have seen that we've had a partnership with FXall, and we get asked quite a bit as to how this actually work. What does this relationship do for front office traders? There's going to be a whole topic on this, and I think we'll have someone from the FXall team joining us. And what I know the date right now is tentatively set for April. The reason why you don't see a specific date just yet is, quite frankly, I'm going to be globetrotting a little bit, and we're going to the InvestOps conference in Orlando, which I think is actually next week. So if you want to catch us or you happen to be attending that, the WBR conferences, this is probably the biggest conference, definitely for the buy side to attend in operations, is the Orlando US-based InvestOps every year in March. This is one of the biggest ones there. We will be there. There are 2 panel sessions I believe I'm on, but we will be around the entire time if you want to ask us any questions. In the meantime, again, we will be publishing the date for the next webinar, so be on the lookout for that. We'll definitely send that out via LinkedIn, I'm pretty sure. And a reminder, even though if you have not submitted your questions already, if you are logged in to Zoom, there's an option on the Q&A function, and you can submit your questions there, and our administrators will make those questions available, so we'll see it. And otherwise, you can actually email us at events@saphyre.com. Again, that's events@saphyre.com. And if we don't get to your question today, or if it came after the webinar, we'll follow you up offline to answer your questions. So now let's move to the Q&A. And I'm just going to be pulling up a little window here so I can read this off. And Max, I'm just going to read these off and probably pass them to you, and we'll banter back and forth.
Sure.
But the first one I have here is, what is the most overlooked area in operations that, if improved, could have the biggest impact on efficiency? So this is an opinion play. Given your background, what do you think?
Well, I don't think I'll surprise anyone here if I say it's onboarding. It's the reasons that we just talked about. There's huge efficiency gains to be had, but it's the foundation. If you get the onboarding right and the data in onboarding right, and you link it to the street, that gives you the foundation for the rest of operations to succeed. And that, I think, is much more powerful than people realize.
Yeah, I think there's a whole pre-trade and post-trade connection that's huge that people don't realize. And if you remember the data before you trade and apply it to post-trade, there's a huge efficiency play there. That's what I think the biggest miss is. But the redundancies also exist in pre-trade. We just talked earlier about the onboarding, the KYC, the tax, the legal, the operational setup, and credit risk teams. They all use the same data and documents. And there's events that update those bits of information, and we're not taking advantage of that just in the pre-trade space, let alone mapping that into post-trade. Let's go on to the next question, and that is, let's see, how do you handle data and documents versioning between all these teams and firms? Okay, so I guess they're asking me from the legal standpoint, like if you're going out to multiple counterparties and updating, how do you track all this stuff? Max?
I'll be a little bit cheeky with my answer and extend it beyond, because it's also the KYC and the legal documents. And at the moment, most people will use some form of SharePoint or some other system. They'll take the document, they'll edit it, they'll save it back to the system, they'll attach it to an email, they'll send it to someone else. And it means that both parties aren't working on the same version of the documents when you're passing things backwards and forwards, so it's hard to collaborate. And really, we think the answer here is very much a tool that keeps track of the version of the document within it, where both parties can edit in the same document. You can see the history and you can see what's happened. That's very much the way we see it, I think.
Yeah, I think that to me is right around the mark. Again, it's all around the end to end. I think there's a couple things. For example, if you are submitting this documentation, it's expired for a tax form is expired to keep, let's say, the Indian market open, and you're responding to a local custodian or broker to keep that open. Well, why wouldn't you want to update all your counterparties? One and done. I think the theme here is one and done. Can you just update that one local custodian tax agent with a tax form? And then remember, hey, broker A, B, and C need it as well, and this other tax agent needs it. This custodian needs it as part of their KYC refresh. Why be responsive? This could save the tax team, the tax departments, huge amount of time, right? If you remember this. This is a great example. In terms of versioning too, you can remember the old expired document versus the new one, or if you're amending a trading agreement, that's another thing you can do. And again, intelligent automation allows you to do this. Okay.
And the question, Gabino, talks about data as well. And I think it's kind of important to talk about how batch processing or sending CSV files and things like that is not great, because you get mismatches in timing. So one party thinks that you're at data point A, Another party thinks you're at data point B. And this whole doing things once a day or once a month is just not a great way of exchanging data between teams. So that's something else to get away from. You want real time, as you were just saying, a real time cloud solution that synchronizes the data points.
Going on to the next question, someone writes that there are a lot of solutions that address this today. What makes your approach different? This is the skepticism, which is good, right? Like it sounds like, we may be repeating things that supposedly other solutions can actually provide. I'll give my quick opinion on this. You can jump on. But I think most solutions are bilateral today. They're not multilateral, and they don't necessarily create memory and permissioning on that data. A lot of the solutions today kind of like collect the information and throw it over the wall to a counterparty and say, hey, that's your problem. So that only works for a one-time event. And it'll only work if you onboard perfectly. But if you have the documents expiring, if you have new SSIs for that same account that need to be amended, unless you actually remember the relationship of those accounts to the permission parties and where they came from and to the electronic platforms that are related to, you can't add that extra benefit. You're not creating this golden source of data that has memory, intelligent memory, and permissioning to be able to create this network effect. I think that's the secret sauce that I think Saphyre is doing differently. It doesn't prohibit others from doing it, but we haven't seen it. We're the only ones, I believe, doing it to date. Now, again, you can get ahead of that with your own manual labor, with high-performing teams that can actually track this and use multiple bilateral tools to get that, or you can use a platform that actually remembers this for you so that you can focus on other higher level functions. But Max, I don't know if there's more color or if I just stole the air on that one.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a single platform where maybe you had SharePoint, Outlook, Word to negotiate documents, a checklist that might be in Excel or paper. It's bringing all of those things into a single place. And I don't think you see that anywhere else. But it's also, to your point about memory, it's not just digitizing a PDF so that people can type in it digitally. It's understanding the data points in the PDF. It's replacing the PDF with data points that are pre-filled with memory, which I think you did say, so that actually we can get a whole lot more efficient and cut errors and get quicker as well when we're exchanging data between people.
Okay, I think we got 3 or 4 more questions here, so I'm going to try to bang them out quickly. The next one says, we have new accounts with KYC issues during post-trade. Are there ways we can get ahead of that? I think we hit on this a little bit, and the idea is actually to, during the post-trade process, allow you to conduct the KYC, I guess, in real time, right? As opposed to, ping-ponging it to your pre-trade onboarding team to get it done and then bring it back to the post-trade team. I think you can get ahead of it, again, in real time during post-trade if something fell through the cracks. This is for your sell sides, I guess, in this case, because the buy side should already know it. It's responding to the sell side, but Max, did I get that right?
Yeah, it's a T+1 question, isn't it? So it's at the moment, some elements of KYC happen after you've done the trading, and there's no reason for that. So in FX, you end up with things in the admin bypass queue. You end up with block trades being held up whether you're doing KYC on 1 or 2 parts of it. So this is it's not just about being quicker, it's about being sooner in the process. And I appreciate that's a subtle distinction, but there is no reason why, when you have all this data optionality from systems like ours, there's no reason why you should be doing KYC after the trade. You should be doing KYC before the trade, and it gives you lots of time, and it means you're acting efficiently, not reactively.
So it means like you can have a proactive method of getting ahead of this issue, but even if it fell through the cracks, there's a backup plan to get it fixed in real time. Yeah. Going again, 3 more questions, I think, and then I think we can wrap this up because I see. And by the way, this is great. I kind of love that people are submitting these questions, and sometimes you never know how this works. The next question was, I think, around standards. It says, are there standards that need to be adopted to achieve these efficiencies? Example, ISO 2022. I think you and I, Max, know there's a number of other standards. Is the common domain. There's also FIX and so on. So I have an answer, but I'll give you the floor first. How do we address the question around standards in order to achieve efficiencies?
Standards are great. We all support standards, but the problem is that we are a global market and you've got different regulators in different places, all wanting to do different things. And even when they actually do the same thing, people adhere to them in slightly different ways. So in my mind, what we actually need is a system and a way of getting things done, which does comply with standards where it needs to, but is flexible, is not bound by the standards. And that's what we try to do, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that there's a fallacy. Standards are good, and firms should adopt it. But there's legacy systems I always use that firms have because banks buy another bank, and there's a mainframe here, Windows 95 there, and those systems may never adopt the latest ISO standard, the common domain model, the latest version of Fix, and so therefore, then what happens, right? And there's reasons that firms kind of understand how their data is set up internally. The idea is, can you create a normalization model so firms can stay lazy if they don't adopt the standard, or they adopted one standard, you adopted a different one, and we can now connect the two and make it interoperable? I think that's where what we've discovered at Saphyre has been a game changer in order to get this acceleration. I think one of the things we bring to bear is, because we understand the trading relationships, the data that's mapped, the account numbers, we can help standardize or normalize that data regardless which standard type. ISO 2022 versus ISO 2025. I think it's out now. We can map those so that we can create that efficiency play. Again, that you can do that exercise without technology, but again, it's a high-performing team that is doing an analysis of the different standards and then manually mapping it on your back end. Okay, I don't want to go too long. Maybe at this, just two more questions. I think we also hit this one too, Max. I'm reading it. It says, how do you link legal amendment activities with operational setups? So we kind of hit, yeah, go ahead.
There's two parts to this, right? So it's the workflow part. So at the moment, you maybe have an operations team emailing the lawyers to do something. So it's kind of inefficient. It's better having it in the workflow. That's part one. But part two is when you look in a trading agreement, and is that an MSFTA, there's legal verbiage, but there's also things that the operations team need. There's, I don't know, eligible collateral. Does the IMA have any, you need to cross-check back to any restrictions that you have and everything else. So what we are trying to do is actually not just solve that workflow piece, but solve getting the trading restrictions, getting the other things out of those trading agreements. And then the post, once you've done that part, is the question of, well, how does the trading system at the investment manager actually know that you're allowed to trade with that bank on that trading agreement? And again, traditionally that's a manual thing, but it doesn't need to be a manual thing. You can take straight from the system to your OMS, and it gives you 100% compliance.
Yeah, and it's like simple things like, hey, if the minimal transfer amount has not been triggered, you don't have to move collateral. Like a little trigger that comes up automatically. But when do we bring that up? It's all around intelligent memory. Two more, and we're going to wrap it up. It says, you covered derivatives trading. Does this help with securities lending? That's so funny. I'm going to give the quick answer. The answer is the activities of whether you're doing derivatives trading or either traditional securities trading, cash trading, or securities lending, it's the same. It's exactly the same. Same KYC, credit, legal, tax, operational setups. Everything that we went over at the beginning applies to securities lending. I think we know this already. We've already conducted several production pilots on securities lending. The use cases are applicable in all forms. It's just some of the nuanced data points that are different, like you're tracking lending relationships as opposed to trading relationships, but the process is the same. I'm going to give you the next one, Max. Question. It says and this is the last one, I think. Yeah, it looks like this is the last one. So T+1 is around the corner in the UK, Europe. Can any of what you just discussed help with that? And I think you said something around this, Max. So do you want to take this one?
Yeah, in really simple terms, if you want to handle T+1, you either need to hire more people or do things more quickly or have them work later. Or you can put in place a system. And you can do a combination of any of those things. But essentially, if you put in place a system like ours, then you get that data integrity. You avoid the things we were talking about in the question before about post-trade KYC. You avoid problems, at least a good proportion of your problems with SSIs causing failed trades. And it means that list of things you now need to do in T+1, where you previously had T2, T3, depending on which market you're in, that list of things becomes a lot shorter. So your chances of success become much higher.
Yeah, I think it's not just for the buy sides, it's for their sell sides and electronic platforms that they work with, as well as the custodians that have to have visibility on when they can settle. It's real time, real time for custodians, real time for sell sides, and real time for the buy sides. So I think that's the exciting thing about this. It's not just real time for the buy sides, it's for that network impact. So that was great. I'm just double checking there was no last minute questions. That was really heavy, but was good. I think we're going to wrap it up here, Max. I want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining our webinar today. Again, if you're interested in more information, I think we're sharing a slide. Yeah, we are. You can find out more information at www.saphyre.com/demo. And again, if you have questions related to the webinar, the events@saphyre.com email address is still available. We will follow up with you offline. Max, thanks so much for joining me today. And again, I'm very grateful for you and the team. And I hope folks who are watching these webinar series see that we're bringing our team members in. These are our knowledge experts who help build our knowledge base and how we can help the industry. And I hope for folks who are going to Invest Ups next week, I will see you in person. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.